Okay, good. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is State Senator Kevin Witkos, and I represent the 8th Senatorial District. I'm here today to bring forward, I think, something that's been long overdue in the state of Connecticut, and that's a constitutional amendment. And I would ask you to think back the last time that you were walking along a sandy beach, or swimming in a pond, in an inland pond, or camping out in a field, or hiking along a trail in one of our great state parks, and you had to think to yourself, I wonder if this will be here in the next 3 years, or 5 years, or 10 years, or 50 years. That thought probably never came to your mind, but what we've seen in the past recent few years in the General Assembly, that property that we once thought was protected and preserved forever may not be necessarily so. And I thought it was important that we take steps and actions to make sure that we do that. And while we do things legislatively, I think we need more protection in the form of a constitutional amendment. And in fact, 3 of our New England region states have constitutional amendments to protect their state-owned property, and that's Maine, Massachusetts, and New York. And I'm proposing today a constitutional amendment which will protect state properties from being sold. Well, we'll go back. There's 3 parts to the bill I want to talk about. The first part of the bill, it says it must be a standalone bill. It can't be included in a omnibus bill, or as what we like to refer into the legislature as an aircraft carrier. So people will individually be able to search and find if there's some state property in their community that is on the block to be sold or transferred or conveyed. Secondly, I'd say once this constitutional amendment passes, we should hold a public hearing in the community where the land resides to make it easier for those people that live and are directly impacted by the transfer or sale or conveyance of that property, easier access to testify before the Committee of Cognizance. Second of all, I think that because it's such a great feat and a great act to transfer property that once somebody thought was protected, that it should be done by a 2/3 majority of the legislature, not by a simple majority. And lastly, any money that is made from the sale of the land should go back directly to the purchase of additional land. Now, the state of Connecticut realized many years ago that we want to protect our open space, and that's what makes Connecticut unique. And in fact, we set a goal of 21% by the year 2023. And in 2010, we've reached 73% of that goal. And I know that the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is working on updated figures, which hopefully will be released soon, which shows that we are making progress on attaining the 21%. It's slow in coming, but I think people may be more friendly to bequeathing property to the state of Connecticut if they know it will remain as is. And we've seen within the past 3 years some very dangerous land swaps. And we can't remember that it's all about quantity. It has to be about quality as well. I'm talking about 17 acres of pristine property traded for 87 acres, I would say, of junk. Luckily, that land deal fell through, and that law was taken off the books by, promoted by a senator that's standing behind me. I'll give him the opportunity to speak in a minute. But how did we arrive here today, and how did I get involved in this? Well, my district has always been a very environmental-friendly district, and last year when the Connecticut State Parks celebrated their 100th anniversary, they asked the legislators to adopt a park. And I adopted Peoples States Forest Park as my park in the town of Barkhamsted. And I didn't want to just put my name to it, but I wanted to do something about it. So I had an intern at the time. I asked him, why don't you formulate a cleanup party, and we'll have people go there and clean up the park. He did that, and we had scores of volunteers. What we had planned out to be a 4 or 5 hour day, we had some bagels for breakfast. We actually brought lunch. We were done in 90 minutes because we had that many volunteers. It was fantastic. And from that, I was at a meeting not only a few months ago where they started this group called FALPS, the Friends of the American Legion and Peoples State Forest, where people would join together and make sure that they preserve the greatness that we have in all of our state parks and all of our properties. And from that, I was having a conversation with the gentleman to my right one day. He said, Kevin, if you have some time, why don't you stop by my house? So one fall afternoon, I knocked on David Left's door, and I said, Dave, I'm here. You want to get together and talk? He said, sure, let's to sit down on the rocking chairs in the front porch. It was kind of a Norman Rockwell-esque, if you will, in the beautiful bucolic downtown Collinsville. And we talked about the preservation of land and how important it was. And Dave, being an author, historian, and the former deputy director of DEEP, Department of Environmental Protection at the time, had offered me some language that he felt that was the best of the states around us, but made ours that much better and that much stronger. And he said, take a look at this and let me know what you think. So I brought that back to Hartford with me, and I showed it to some folks, and they thought that was absolutely fantastic. This is something that the state of Connecticut should do and needs to do to make sure that generations to come can enjoy what we enjoy today. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Mr. David Leff.
Thank you very much, Senator. I never thought so much could come of sitting out on my front porch, but you all come down. I want to say good afternoon to everyone, because it really is a good afternoon, given what we're discussing. You know, if you think your favorite hiking trail, your favorite picnic spot, your favorite wildlife watching area, your favorite fishing hole on public lands is preserved in perpetuity, well, you better think again. Over the years, late-night legislation, last-minute amendments have given away public conservation lands. This proves that nothing short of a constitutional amendment can ensure permanent protection of the parks, forests, and natural areas that Connecticut citizens think are theirs forever. I want to thank Senator Witkos for his courage and his foresight in bringing the constitutional amendment forward for General Assembly debate. I also want to express my gratitude to Carl Wagner and the Council on Environmental Quality for giving this issue public currency in their report of 2 years ago. Finally, I want to thank my colleagues at the Connecticut Forest and Park Association and like-minded groups for their continued advocacy in supporting constitutional protection for some of our most valuable ecological properties and most beautiful lands. I'm so grateful. I really want to express my gratitude, because this is the first significant step in a dream that I have had for many years, going back to when I was Deputy Commissioner of Environmental Protection, spearheading the writing of the first state green plan and developing the 21% open space goal. This was something that had occurred to me, that I mentioned in private to people, and no one was interested. They said that was just too far out. Now we hear that the 21% open space goal might not be reachable by some of those who hold the purse strings. That makes the constitutional amendment protecting what we have even more important. Now, our parks, our forests, our natural areas belong to all the people of Connecticut now and for all time. We have a sacred duty to be good stewards and pass these places on to those who come afterwards. No politician, no private individual, no generation has a right to damage them or give them away. Let's join with New York, Massachusetts, and Maine, providing public lands with constitutional safeguards. Only through a constitutional amendment can we keep our faith with our forebears who worked tirelessly to preserve these lands. Only through a constitutional amendment can we guarantee the blessing of these places for our children, for our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. In an increasingly urban and frenetic world, they will need these places to challenge their bodies and soothe and renew their spirits. Connecticut's future landscape depends on us today. We cannot fail to protect it. Thank you. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the executive director of the Connecticut Forest and Park Association, this state's oldest conservation organization, dating back to 1895, Eric Hammerling.
Wow,
Pretty good.
Thank you, David, and you're a very tough act to follow. The Connecticut Forest and Park Association has made this our #1 public policy priority, that is having a constitutional amendment to better protect state lands. Not only because the chair of our public policy committee is David Leff, but really because our entire board has grasped the importance of protecting our forest, parks, wildlife management areas into the future. Next generations need to enjoy these special places that we've set aside today for tomorrow. Now, as you know, in 2015, there were 4 bad proposals that were in the Conveyance Act that fortunately were taken out because of the heroic efforts of legislators like you see right here, who were tremendously supportive of we can't be giving away public lands without any sort of benefit to the public. I'll just briefly mention what those proposals were, and we hope they will not come back. There was a proposal to give away 4.7 acres of Silver Sands State Park that would have been converted by the city of Milford to municipal parking and to other purposes. There was over 100 acres of the Centennial Watershed Forest that would have been given to the town of Fairfield for quote-unquote protection, even though those lands already had a conservation easement on them. And there were sensitive habitats for endangered toads in the Quinnebog Wildlife Management Area that would have been damaged if 2 private roads were built for sand and gravel extraction. Those were all proposed in the 2015 Conveyance Act. But they failed because of the legislators and also through a lot of organizations that spent the time to combat them. Obviously CFPA was opposed, but CEQ, CLCC, the League of Conservation Voters, the Friends of Connecticut State Parks, Rivers Alliance of Connecticut, the Nature Conservancy, many others said this is outrageous. We can't let this happen. And I want to thank all of those organizations and all the people from throughout the state who contacted their legislators and said, please don't let this happen. But it also made it clear how necessary it is, as David said, to have a constitutional amendment. And as Senator Witkos said, Maine, Massachusetts, New York already have constitutional provisions in place to protect their state lands, and they have for decades. It's time for Connecticut to follow suit. We hope that there will be a constitutional amendment that has those provisions that were explained by Senator Witkos very well. I think that is, ideally what needs to happen. We need to have a local public hearing. We need to have a separate bill for each conveyance. When the public lands have agricultural, conservation, or recreational values, they can't be wrapped up with some decent proposals. That's how a lot of bad stuff gets through this legislature. Every year the Conveyance Act has some pretty infamous words that lead off each section of the Conveyance Act, and that is, notwithstanding any provisions of the general statutes. Now, that means that each section is saying, ignore all those other laws that we've passed, let's just give this land away. It's a pretty outrageous way to start each section of the Conveyance Act. This constitutional amendment is critical. But I do want to make it clear that we're not arguing that the language has to be absolute, because there may be instances in the future where a trade of state land with other land could result in a net benefit for the public. So the language of this amendment has to be importantly well crafted, and I know the language that you've seen, Senator Witkos, was well crafted to ensure that if there are those public benefits that may result, it is factored into the constitutional amendment. But the way that things have been occurring under the current process, the public is getting typically nothing of value in return when valuable public lands are given away. So again, I want to thank Senator Witkos for your being open to thinking about this really important issue and to take the first steps necessary to ensure that future generations will have forests, parks, wildlife management areas to enjoy. So thank you. Oh, and now I'd like to introduce the next speaker, a very good, close personal friend and an outstanding conservationist. Amy Patterson is the executive director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. If there is any land issue that you can imagine being talked about in the legislature, Amy's going to be there. And in particular, I know has some fondness for land trusts and the thought of protecting land in perpetuity that she's going to share with us.
Thank you so much. So I don't have to do my introduction because Eric just did it for me, which is always nice. Thank you, Eric. But on behalf of CLCC, Connecticut Land Conservation Council, I would like to thank you, Senator Witkos, for offering us this opportunity to be here today and to talk about this exciting constitutional amendment to better protect state lands. I'd also want to thank and reiterate the thanks that have been given before to the Council on Environmental Quality, Carl Wagner, as well as the Connecticut Forest and Park Association and other partners here today for bringing this issue to the forefront of state conservation policy. The Connecticut Land Conservation Council, as Eric so alluded to, is the umbrella organization for the conservation community here in Connecticut. And we work most predominantly with the 137 land trusts here in our state. 137 land trusts, that's the third most in the country. We just follow California and Massachusetts. We work to ensure that our state's conservation lands are protected in perpetuity. It's the heart of our mission, and it's an annual priority for us as well for policy. The Connecticut Land Trust community is the majority of which is an all-volunteer community. They work tirelessly to protect lands in their communities. Together, they have conserved over 100,000 acres of land in our state. Their dedication is unwavering. I see it every day. It is truly a privilege to work with Connecticut's land trusts. So it is of great frustration to the land trusts. They are critical partners in the state's efforts to meet its conservation goals, the 21% goal as alluded to by Senator Witkos, and the goals within their own communities. And it's frustrating for them that our public lands are largely unprotected and vulnerable to a conveyance process that is lacking in transparency and detail, as again alluded to by both Senator Witkos and by Eric Hammerling. A constitutional amendment will create a process to best protect the millions of public and private investments that have already been made in acquiring the lands that protect our air and water, provide for critical habitat, enable us to grow our food, generate revenue through business and tourism, and provide the public with an opportunity to recreate and enjoy the landscapes that make Connecticut so special. But perhaps more importantly, a constitutional amendment will help to restore the confidence of land trusts and all of the state's conservation partners, including, most especially, the landowners who truly believe and want to conserve their land, that there is a system in place to ensure that land entrusted to the state for conservation will be protected to the greatest extent possible. Thank you again for this wonderful opportunity. We are really excited to be partners in this effort as it moves forward. And it is my pleasure now to introduce Pam Adams, who is the president of the Friends of Connecticut State Parks. When I talk about volunteers with such love and affection in the land trust community, I think we can say the same for the Friends of groups. They are terrific, terrific for us all. Thank you.
Thank you. As Amy mentioned, I am with the Friends of Connecticut State Parks, which is a private nonprofit volunteer organization that is an umbrella organization for 24 individual state park friends groups across Connecticut with a membership of about approximately 6,000 people. All are very avid volunteer members. And on behalf of all of the Friends members, I'd like to thank Senator Witkos for his support for the proposed amendment to our state's constitution that will serve to protect Connecticut's valuable and irreplaceable state park, forest, water access, and wildlife properties. In addition to Senator Witkos, I would also like to thank Senators Art Linares and Senator Paul Formica, who are behind me, who are also avid park supporters and park adopters. The State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection utilizes great discretion in selecting the properties it purchases. The agency applies a stringent review process for all potential conservation properties, whether they be through donation, bequeath, bargain sale, or outright purchase at fair market value. A property may be acquired to create or add on to a state park, to protect fragile natural resources, preserve Connecticut's history, support wildlife management, or provide much sought-after water access. Each parcel is critically important for the very specific reasons. Only those parcels that have extraordinary benefit to the public of Connecticut and to our quality of life are pursued. Allowing the taking of valuable state recreation properties through conveyance is an affront to the public trust. It sets a very bad precedent, which could easily result in many acres of property being removed from any state park, forest, or trail for a purpose which does not serve all taxpayers of the state and our citizens, all of whom have a vested interest in the protection of these lands for future generations. There have been many attempts over years to convey state recreation and natural resource properties for the benefit of a town, private developer, or business. Through the efforts of conservation organizations, friends groups, ordinary citizens, and supportive legislators, these potential short-sighted takings have been thwarted. With ever-tightening budgets and increased land values, the pressure on these lands will only increase. A little more than a century ago, people with great vision pursued the establishment of a system of state forests and parks and the preservation of Connecticut's great outdoor places. They recognized that there was an unfulfilled need by our citizens and guests to be surrounded by nature and to learn from all the wonders our state offered. Over the past 100 years, Connecticut has followed the vision of the park and forest founders and done an outstanding job of acquiring some of the most amazing landscapes within our borders. Today, leaders like Senator Witkos embrace this vision through his support of the constitutional amendment, making the conveyance process more visible and open to public scrutiny and subject to greater legislative action. The Friends of Connecticut State Parks hope that all legislators, especially those that have signed on to be state park adopters, will join Senator Witkos in taking this opportunity to preserve Connecticut's precious recreation and natural resource lands in perpetuity. The Friends of Connecticut State Parks express our appreciation to Senator Witkos for taking on and supporting this critical issue, and to all legislators who sign on to support this amendment. Thank you. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce my senator, Senator Art Linares.
Good to see you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Pamela Adams, for all your work. Pamela is my constituent, so every year when it comes time to adopt state parks, I have to adopt all 13 of them in my district. But thank you for all your work. Thank you, Amy Patterson, Eric Hammerling, and David Left, for your advocacy. I'd like to thank Deep and all the advocates here today. This is a tremendous day for you, and congratulations to you. Let's make sure this bill gets passed in this legislative session. I'd also like to thank Senator Witkos for his leadership on this issue, Senator Fasano, and Senator Formica. They're going to be huge advocates for this bill moving forward. This is very important to the people of the 33rd District, in which I have the honor of representing. From Portland all the way down to Old Saybrook, from Clinton all the way up to Colchester. Land conservation is very important to every one of our constituents. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I got involved in running for public office in the first place. Senator Witkos spoke a bit about the infamous Haddam land swap, swapping 17 beautiful acres of land right on the Connecticut River out for 87. And it wasn't an equitable trade, and it would have been harmful to our environment. And thankfully, over the past 3 years, we've been able to put a permanent stop to that law, and we don't have to worry about that happening in the future ever again. But this bill, this constitutional amendment, will protect all land that all of you have advocated to preserve for the future. And that's something certainly worth fighting for. So the folks out in the 33rd District, you can count on Connecticut River Valley. You can count on us being able to preserve the land on the river in Essex, whether it's the wetlands in Lyme, the beachfront in Clinton. You can count on that being there for generations because of Senator Witkos, Senator Fasano's leadership on this constitutional amendment. So it's an honor to be here today. And to close it out, it's my honor to welcome Senator Witkos back here to stand.
Well, thank you, Senator. I just wanted to recognize Senator Fasano, who is the Republican leader of the state Senate, who has joined us in our support of the constitutional amendment. So what happens here? What's the next steps? The bill was dropped, I believe, on the desks of the GAE committee this morning and potentially the Environment Committee, because you think it's an environmental bill issue because it's all about open space and lands. It should go there. But it's the GAE committee that has cognizance over the Constitution of the state of Connecticut and on conveyance of lands and transfers. So we'll put it at both committees, and I don't care who raises it. Just want to make sure it gets passed. So once we find out which committee has agreed to hear the bill, please make sure you reach out to your constituents, to your supporters, to say you need to come and testify before that committee and make sure the bill passes and moves along. You know, this isn't a Republican or a Democrat issue. It's about everything and everyone, from the smallest creatures to the plants to everybody, the whole ecosystem that revolves around forests and rivers and lands. And without each other, you know, this kind of sounds crazy, but like that circle of life thing, if we didn't have the plants to create the oxygen with the fish, you know, it's devastating if we lost it all. And so we've got to make sure those protections are in place. So hopefully the bill has the public hearing. It passes, I like to say, unanimously in both chambers. If it does, or at least if it passes by 2/3 majority, it'll be on the ballot in November for every resident of the state of Connecticut to voice their opinion whether they think that we deserve and need a constitutional amendment to the Connecticut State Constitution. And then from there, the next legislature will convene and add that onto the book. So thank you all for coming. We'll be happy to answer any questions anybody may have. Yes, sir.
Senator Witkos, DEPA said a few times now that they're not going to reach the 21% of preserved space by 2023 goal that they have. And one of the things that I think they're thinking about in their upcoming green plan is making larger greenways in the state, and Eric had mentioned this. I wonder if there's any concern on your behalf that hindering their ability to transfer land or give it away might, down the road, hinder their ability to create these larger greenways in the state.
I don't think it's a hindrance. I think we've outlined a process that any entity that's involved with either the transfer or sale of some state property can go before the legislature in a public hearing to say, we want to trade this piece off, but in exchange, we'll be able to obtain rights or access to this, which will now become part of the Greenway. We'll flush it out in a public hearing just like anything, but at least it will be in an open, transparent process so everybody will see. If there's money involved, then that will be used to repurchase other land. And again, 2/3 of the General Assembly will have to say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Because I'll tell you now, we have the rails to trails that comes up through my neck of the woods, and that is some of the best spent public dollars that I can think of. It's an economic driver to our downtown. It benefits from the youngest to the oldest. I see kids being pushed in baby carriages to senior citizens walking their animals. It's a great way to exercise, which is, again, promoting healthy habits. And I personally think that was a great investment of public dollars. So are we going the Greenway? Let's hear what the plan is. But it outlines a process so that everybody can weigh in on it. Thank you.